I think it just occurred to me that there's a few kind of wrap-up things, and we can open this up for discussion, particularly because we got lots of time. First of all, I think it's important to mention Alexander is a little too modest. He's the pioneer of the oil red O stuff, so he's the guy where that started, and he's also the guy who made the presentation this past year in Lausanne that actually is the first one to join the two sequentially, oil red O and physical developer. So I just thought you should know that. And second thing I wanted to talk about was I don't want you to think that we are sort of head in the clouds on this thing. People who spend all their time in the lab, and people will say, well, that's great theory and everything, but where the rubber hits the road, it's a whole different reality. We know that you can't incorporate all of this stuff into regular processing. Nobody's got those kinds of resources. But we also know that we never know when the phone's going to ring, and that's going to be the defining case of our career. And it's important to know that this exists for those occasions. When you get your own personal version of the OJ or the John Benet Ramsey or whatever it is, that you've got all your good stuff ready to go. You may have a single paper exhibit, and it's important to know that you can do all these three things. You're not going to do that on a hold-up note or something from a break and enter necessarily, because it comes again to allocation of resources. But both of these techniques have performed repeatedly in case situations. So separate and apart from the laboratory stuff, which we've presented to you here, and which you're going to have a look at this afternoon, it's important to know that this stuff is also, all of it worked well and produced repeatedly in the real world. And we also know about expectations. I talked about that a little bit this morning, and the big difference that I would say, there's many differences. Everything is a kind of a good news, bad news joke, but in addition to all of the differences, the pros and cons that Alexandra talked about between oil red O and PD, it's a love-hate relationship with PD, because as much as the stuff is a pain in the neck, it works, and it has produced for me when nothing else did in my career on real cases. But the oil red O is easier to make. It's more forgiving in terms of contamination and so on. So you don't have to be, Center for Disease Control exact with your standards of glassware and all that stuff, and it'll still work. Oil red O is about as predictable as Paris Hilton. I mean, you just get to think of a certain way of it working, and then as someone, I think you mentioned that all of a sudden everything if it falls out of solution, or you mentioned a problem with it anyway, where it was, and I've had situations where I've used brand new stuff and brand new glassware, and had a complete failure. And when I started doing it after in my own lab, I bought new plastic bags and lined my glassware so the glassware never touched the stuff, and I just threw away the bags afterwards. So that seemed to make a difference in terms of ensuring the cleanliness and the stability of the reaction. So anyway, I just thought I wanted to make those few points, and this is all about sequential processing, whether we're talking here, because it stands to reason if you're going to get everything that is potentially there, if you have a range of reagents that all target different things or different parts of the potential combination, you don't have to be a scientist to know that your fingerprint is rich in A, B, and C, but you're targeting with your reagent D, you're not going to find that fingerprint. And since we have the time, just anecdotally, I worked on a very high profile serial killer case in Canada, and we were informed that they had found the residence of this person. And for anybody who worked on it, they had never worked on a bigger case in their career. And they went through the residence before they did anything else with a light examination with a Luma light, which was one of the first forensic light sources. And it's a virtual quote from the guy who did the job that there were a couple of areas of ridge detail but nothing worth photographing. So a month and a half later, the house is completely emptied of everything, and they called our department and asked, is there anything else we can do? So one of my employees at the time, who was a real nonlinear thinker, said we could take our laser down, our big mainframe laser. This is the laser that's three-phase power and water cooled, and examine the house. And I asked him how we would do that, and he said he would hardwire it into the hydro pole. And all I could think of was the lawsuits when he fried himself. So we went to a secondary solution of getting the military to supply us with a generator and using the household water. And it was a pain in the neck, time-consuming and expensive. And as to my knowledge, it's the first time in North America where a mainframe laser was taken to a crime scene. But in the course of 2 days, he found and photographed 40 impressions, untreated impressions on the walls, the cabinets, the doors, all through the house, including one big full bare footprint on the bedroom wall. And they just did not show up under forensic light source. And that's a whole other subject, the comparison of monochromatic light versus filtered lamps. But it didn't stop there. He, as I said, he's a outside-the-box thinker, and he sealed the house up and filled it full of iodine. And he made it so toxic he had to go in with a Scott air pack even 2 days later. But he found 4 fingerprints with the iodine. And then the last thing he did was to make up buckets of ninhydrin, and he used a paint roller, and he did the walls and the door frames and everything, and he found 16 more fingerprints. Not one of those fingerprints was developed by more than one technique. Why? Because they all target different things. Who knows what the non-treated, inherently fluorescent fingerprints are composed of? Who knows what that target is? It could be anything. It could be B-complex vitamins. We know that they fluoresce, riboflavin and pyridoxine. In fact, their fluorescent profile is extremely similar to tests that we've done with just residue in the lab. But it could also be something from a cosmetic, the cover of a book. Virtually, it's open-ended. And next, you come to the iodine, and the iodine is more in line with the oil red O and the physical developer. It's targeting sebaceous oil and other similar types of excretions and deposits. And again, it could be that, or it could be the guy had Kentucky Fried Chicken and he had a little bit of chicken grease on his fingers. Forensically, we don't care, but it's just that that is possible as one of the targets. And then finally, of course, we come to the amino acids, and the bottom line of that is he had 60 fingerprints on that case collectively as a result of 3 separate procedures, 3 separate targets. And we would have suffered significantly a loss in evidence had we neglected any one of those. And again, I come back to the allocation of resources. You can't do this kind of sequential processing all the time, but it's good to know that it's possible and it works when your big cases come up.
Yeah.
So,
for example, in our lab, with the paper, we used to do, for now, DFO, ninhydrin, Alredo standard. And when we come to kind of a bigger crime, just like well, not a break and entry, but a murder or something else that is, for example, a rape or something like this, then we go to the PD. But usually we don't take the time to go to the PD every time because it's time consuming, and we're receiving, where I'm working, all the stuff that came from all the city over her lab. So actually that's a huge amount of stuff, going around 20,000 evidence a year, which is a lot. So It all depends of what you want to do and just how farther you want to go into the treatment. Yeah.
And it's more to what you were talking about with the sequential processing of basically any kind of evidence or scene. I have found that not with necessarily a Daubert kind of a thing, but when you're on the stand and they want to know why CSI effect, why you didn't do everything possible on a burglary, how you justify doing that on a murder case, which we all know why and it's time, but how you verbalize that in trial without them thinking you're a moron. The jury especially, because they watch CSI and they know everything. But
That's a great point, and it kind of speaks to something that I believe very strongly in, and that is the need for pretrial conference with the prosecuting attorney. And in my career, oftentimes the Crown Attorney, as it is in Canada, would not even know my name until he got to the office the day of court, and he picks up the first docket, and I'm sitting there in the chair outside his office, and he says, Dalrymple, fingerprints, you're on third. And that was usually the extent of our pretrial conference. Well, folks, that's just not good enough for any situation where you anticipate any kind of a challenge. And of course, whether you anticipate it or not, it can come at any time. But I guess as a rule of thumb, if you can have a word with your prosecuting attorney, who in my experience often is the first time he's ever had or she's had fingerprint evidence. So they haven't a clue about the impact, the inference that can be drawn, and they need to know all that kind of stuff. But more than that, if there's anything contentious, and that speaks to not only what was done but what wasn't done, then it's a lot better if it comes out in direct rather than leaving it for the defense to make it look like you have been negligent or lazy or sloppy or ineffective. So if it comes out in chief, you're asked the question, are there other processes that you could have used on this evidence? Yes, sir, there are. Did you use them here? No, sir, I did not. Why did you not use them here? We have a policy in our office that for a certain class of offense, we use this range of processes, and depending on the gravity of the situation and the assessment of the exhibits, that is their applicability or their promise, we make an educated guess. And it doesn't forestall cross-examination, they can still get up. But the effect is often diffused because you've made it aware. You're more than aware of those techniques, you're more than aware of what could be done, but you're also informing them of your honesty and of the realities of life. We just don't have the resources to do everything in every single case. And another example of that is even in a homicide, if you go to a homicide scene and there's a body lying on the floor in the living room, do you take everything out of the fridge and process it? Do you take everything out of every cupboard and process it? Of course not. Because you're making an educated guess as the expert on the scene, and I can guarantee you that if we take a sample crime scene like that, and we take the 12 people in this room to be the officer of record at that scene, the list of exhibits is going to be different in every single case. And it won't mean that anybody didn't do their job. It just means that we live in an imperfect world where there are not black and white decisions that can always be made, and that we are all going to view that scene differently in terms of its extent and how much of that requires processing. Inescapable reality. And I don't think we should try to sort of hide or hope that doesn't get asked. That's just a fact. It's just the way it is. So whenever we do a scene, it's not always formulaic. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's very clear. If you have paper exhibits, they're going to be processed for amino acids. First and foremost, if they've been immersed in water, then the oil red O and or physical developer are an obvious choice. Those are easy choices. But we have to know, in fact, that's the importance of seeing this kind of stuff. We have to know these things exist, even if we don't plan to use them in this situation, and be prepared to explain why. Any other questions or comments?
I got one.
Sure.
Go ahead.
And just before, I know you handed out a survey, and I didn't know if you wanted to be able to.
Ah,
relay
thank
those
you.
results
Yeah,
to other
could everybody pass their surveys to the left? And then if everybody on the left corner could pass them forward so they're on the corner of this desk here, that would be much appreciated. And I want to discuss that survey a little bit. Thank you very much for reminding me on that.
You want to go with the question first?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, I was going to ask about for sequential processing with the IND, and then hydrogen is never mentioned after that.
Ah, good
Yeah.
question. You mean in terms of the sequence?
Yes.
Yeah, I asked that question about 10 years ago of the of one of the main researchers from Israel on that, and he said there's really no point because indane seems to be a very efficient reactor with all of the amino acids, and it reacts quickly with them, so there's nothing to be gained by processing with ninhydrin afterwards the way there is with DFO. In fact, that's what makes it. The two things that make it such a superior reagent over DFO are, number one, the fluorescence intensity of it, being rated by the Australians as 10 times as sensitive as DFO as a fluorescer. But secondly, the fact that it seems to use up or react with much more of the available amino acid and much quicker than either of the other two reagents. So there's really nothing to be gained by sequential processing amino acid and amino acid.
Okay.
So the two procedures we would recommend, I would strongly recommend, first of all, the reagent of choice be the indane dione, and it's been adopted as the reagent of choice for the U.S. Secret Service and the Australian Federal Police, and I think that's going to increase as time goes on. Failing that, the sequence of DFO followed by ninhydrin. But I think we're still in this kind of evolutionary stage right now, and you will, over a period of time, I think, see indane dione replace it as the reagent of choice.
What about for photographic purposes, as far as like using the color mode and not having to? Could you still go? You could still go behind it and get it to react with ninhydrin.
If you wish to make it react to make the pictures at room light, for example, instead
At room, oh, you mean without a forensic light
Yes,
source?
without a light source.
I think that, and I'm operating on the assumption that pretty much everyone has a forensic light source. And if your department doesn't, then I would say that would be the top priority ahead even of acquiring these technologies. That the forensic light sources now are such an essential part of the lab. I think that my recommendation is that be the top priority. And once it is, then I don't know how other people feel, but I wouldn't even bother looking for color mode in either DFO or indane dione. I would go right to fluorescent. To me, it's a waste of time because whatever is there in the color mode is going to be there in the fluorescent mode, plus a whole bunch more you didn't see with the lights on. So that would be my my recommendation for the amino acid stage of things. I would be thinking fluorescence pretty much. And then once you've done that, you can go back to ambient light with the oil red O and the PD.
And it's more true since you know that ninhydrin itself is not as good as DFO, and DFO itself is not as good as ninhydrin, and that indane dione could do both. So at the end of the day, it may, even if you use your ninhydrin to bring it back into color mode, if you wish, you won't have all the fingerprint that you get with the indane dione. So.
Do you know if that work or that his work is published? Did he write that down?
Robert
in any paper?
Ramatowski's?
Is it
Yes.
when you're talking about the indane dione reacting with more efficiently with all the amino acids. Is that in a paper? Is that in Robert's paper? Is that your Israeli? Is that Dr.
It's kind of a conglomeration of sources, but the best source for getting to what you're talking about, I think, is the Journal of Forensic Sciences, September 2008, Ramatowski's paper on indane-dione versus DFO. And the slides I showed you of the envelopes that he received, there are examples of that in his paper. Yeah. To me, that's one of the most telling examples because that's comparing apples to apples. They weren't exhibits, they weren't, nobody salted the mine. He just took envelopes that he received over a long period of time, lots of envelopes, and processed them first in DFO. And then it's important, too, to remember that by the time you have introduced the indane-dione into this sequence, to some degree, the surface, the exhibits have already been degraded because they've already been exposed to something else that goes for the same thing they go for. And just the fact that even if there was nothing in it, they've been immersed in a solution, so they've had something done to them. So they didn't get pristine exhibits to work with for the indane-dione. And to have those kinds of added results repeatedly just illustrated for me very eloquently how much more sensitive this stuff is and why people are making that conversion. And I have used it myself operationally on many occasions, and I have now achieved at least the same comfort level I had when ninhydrin was the big kid on the block. So that's why I'm so strong on the stuff. And I have not seen either so far any indication of the kind of instability that I mentioned with ninhydrin, where prints will suddenly after 6 months or a year appear, or after 6 months or a year disappear. I haven't seen that happen with the indane-dione. The fluorescing compound seems to be very stable and lasting over a period of time.
Survey?
Beg your pardon?
Survey?
Oh yeah, thank you. So we have all the surveys here. Okay, what I wanted to mention about these is I am very interested in the information contained in these, but the other thing is we wanted to get some good pieces of paper as samples for processing this afternoon. So we've got 12 unwitting donors. I didn't want to alert you ahead of time, my apologies, but I didn't figure you'd mind. And since you guys are going to be helping with the processing, we're going to split these up. Some of these are going to be immersed in water, thereby making them unsuitable candidates for indane-dione or anything else in the amino acid category. And they will go directly to the, well, I think we may even split them again and put part of them in the oil red O and then into the physical developer, but then some of them we'll put directly into physical developer and have a comparison that way. And then the other half we're going to put through the whole procedure. We're going to put them through indane-dione and then through oil red O and then physical developer. And we'll be able to monitor if we have picked up an increase, a net gain at any point in the process. We're hoping that's the case. Of course, you can't always predict these things. And in anything this unstable, it's a little frustrating sometimes because it's kind of like if your car's making a funny noise and you take it to the mechanic, it stops making the noise. So we're just hoping that, that we're going to get the results we're looking for to illustrate what we've been telling you.
And I also bring some thermal paper, so we'll be able
Yes,
to make some
that's-
tests with it. So.